you're never going to be number one forever, and only one person can be number one. So I think if you can really fall in love with that, that's what it has to be about, because you'll never be happy.
Welcome back to another episode of Entrepreneur Unleashed. I'm so glad that you're here today, because today in my studio, this guy, you are not going to want to miss a single second of the bombs that he's going to be dropping. Why? Because I spent probably about 4 or 5 hours like stalking this guy on the internet over the course of this weekend, just to make sure I was prepared to have a great conversation, and I'm confident he's going to over-deliver. So I have in the studio with me Tanner Chidester. I want to say this. You guys know, if you've been following me, that I believe wholeheartedly that the best way to shortcut your journey of success is to learn vicariously through others. So that's what we're going to do right now. I'm Edward Collins, and let's get into this episode. Tanner, thank you so much for being willing to come into the studio today and just have a conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I wish everyone could see the setup here. It's amazing. So thanks again.
I appreciate that. Well, I know that you've had a pretty interesting journey in your entrepreneurial journey. It hasn't been decades and decades long, but it's been significant.
Yeah.
Before we jump into where you are today, I'm a little curious, like, what actually inspired you to become an entrepreneur in the first place?
Yeah. I already got goosebumps. So my dad was a teacher, very religious. He also was kind of like a pastor. It's probably the best way to put it. Okay. So very conservative. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. We had 7 kids. So I got 2 brothers. I have 4 sisters. I think what really started for me was I didn't grow up poor. I think that's an overstatement, but we only just had enough. And I think part of it was because of, the job my dad had. Okay. And he was just really good at budgeting. And then the other part is he just didn't feel like he should spoil us. And in hindsight, I'm glad. At the time, I was very upset because we grew up in, I would say, more privileged, like suburban neighborhood. Okay. But a lot of the families only had 1 or 2 kids. So the way I viewed it is I said, well, I don't get a car and I don't get these things because I got 5 siblings, 6 siblings. So it was really more when they budgeted, because what would happen, and my grandparents actually had this too, but my dad would set a budget with my mom, and my mom would kind of, go buy something she wasn't supposed to. And then they would sit down at the table, and he's like, her name is Kim. He's like, Kim, like I told you we had this budget. You're not going to spend it. You spend over it anyways. And it would cause a lot of friction. It wasn't anything ever super severe, but I remember them fighting. And when I would ask them to buy stuff, like, oh, we can't do that. You got to make your own money. And I was like, Mom, you know what? One day I'm going to be so rich, I'm going to get meal prep. Because I always had to, she'd always cook for us, and I couldn't get certain things. And so that's, I think, where it started at a young age, is I just wanted to make sure I never had to kind of worry about the cost of things. Because in my eyes, even today, the reason most people can't do things is because of money. It's not because they don't want to. It's just I can't afford it. And so I always wanted to make sure that I could do what I wanted when I wanted, because I didn't get to do that when I was growing up, and I didn't see my parents do that.
I want to touch on something real quick, though, because what you just said, I can't afford it, that limiting belief around money. In the conversations that I have with business owners all the time, we constantly come back to that limiting belief. Right. And I see that so often early in an entrepreneur's journey. Yeah. But by the time they're sitting next to me or across the table, that belief is usually shattered, right? I mean, so tell me about like that, your mental state around money now.
Well, I think the best time where I really learned and saw that is actually from I got bullied a lot as a kid, so I really got heavy into sports and weightlifting around 12. Okay. And then from 12 to about 22 or 23, my whole life was basically football. Like I just want to play in the NFL. So the way I attack business now, if you had looked back previously, you're like, this guy's crazy. Like I would go to the gym 3 hours, and I'd run for 3 hours. And at the time, in high school, I was playing basketball. So then I'd do 3 hours of basketball, and that was my summers. And then during school, I would lift before school and after school. So I was just super crazy. But I think for me is when I turned 23, I had a mentor, and he convinced me to drop out of school. And the conversation was, hey, you can make more money, building a business, da-da-da. And I didn't have a lot of money, and I didn't really know too much about coaching, but I'd seen it, and I was like, man, I'm smart. Like, I don't need that. Like, I have straight A's. I played Division I football. I've done well with girls. Like, I got this. And then I remember to this day, I was 23, I had about $2,000 in my bank account. Okay. And then at 25, I kind of did it my way, and I had $2,000 in my bank account. And I remember thinking, man, like, I just wasted 2 years of my life because I was stubborn. And I had this kind of moment. I don't know what it was, but people were like, oh, you're young, you got time. And people say all the time. And I think sometimes it's at a detriment to the kid because the kid goes, oh, like I do have time.
Right.
So it's almost like they don't take it seriously. And at 25, for whatever reason, I just had this thought. I'm like, man, like I'm getting old. Like I'm 25 and people laugh, but I was like, man, like no girls are going to want to date me. Like I got to start taking life more serious. So I went and I invested in a coach and I paid everything I had. I had $2,000. It was my first credit card ever. I never even applied for a credit card. Got the credit card. I think I had a $5,000 limit. I paid $3,000. And I just remember thinking like, this has to work. Like if this doesn't work, I'm screwed. And it worked. And there's a lot of reasons why it worked, but that was kind of the first time where I realized, you know, I can't afford it. It was just an excuse. And I had to figure out a way to do it because the people who have the answers are not going to help you for free.
Right.
They're just not typically, or they don't have time, or they have so many other things on their plate. And so if you really want someone to take time out of their day and help you, you got to usually pay for it.
There's always going to be some sort of investment. It's either going to be your time invested, your talent invested, or your treasure.
And the time doesn't usually work. I mean, because if you knew what to do, you'd already be doing it. Exactly. And it was funny because once I started hiring these coaches, the second I hired a coach, if it didn't work, I didn't even wait till the program ended. I was like, no, this isn't working. Like, let me hire someone else. And I just moved so aggressively. I think in the first 6 months, I had 6 coaches. And
oh my goodness.
And I was, every ounce of money I made, I would put it back in. And my dad, he actually started getting upset. He's like, Tanner, like, you'd already have like $100,000 in the bank if you stop paying these guys. But I said, Dad, like, if I don't figure this ad stuff out, like, I'm never going to hit my goal. And so I just knew it was part of the game. And I think that was very helpful for me because, you know, it's like dating. People, you know, I say this analogy as a joke, but I'm like, well, look, like if you're dating a girl and she breaks up with you, are you gonna start dating guys? And they're like, well no. And I'm like, okay. So why would you do that with coaching? And I just think people have to have a little bit of understanding that it's not a straight line to success. It's bumpy.
Oh yeah, so. Definitely. And I think that we're going to definitely unpack a lot of the things that have gotten you where you are now. But I do want the audience to understand who you are today. Like you're building an empire, and it looks like it's something that's pretty substantial. Like, tell me a little bit about what's going on in your business life today.
Yeah, so right now I'm in the transition of stepping out of my main company. So the timeline is basically around 25. That's when I started having some success. I'm 30 now, so about a 5-year window. I started a fitness company and I was an online trainer. That did really well. So I put my head down. I was working 16 plus hours a day. It actually started affecting my health. There's videos in my portals where I'm like coughing and wheezing and stuff. And my clients will still make jokes about it. They're like, dude, your first portals were terrible, but I just like had to push through. So I did that for a year. And then I had a bunch of trainers start asking me for help. And initially I pushed people away because my outlook on business coaches specifically, I really hated business coaches, which is very ironic now.
Yes.
But my mindset was, man, I'm really smart and I work really hard and I almost failed. So like all these other people, they're probably going to fail. And that was kind of like a mindset thing for me for a while. But so many people started asking, I'm 25 and I'm like, man, there's like $150,000 on the table right now if I sign these people up. And they're they're like, just show me what you're doing in your fitness business. I was like, I just give them access to all my stuff and that's it. So sign them up. That overtook my main company. I was doing about $150,000 a month at that time. Overtook it in 3 months. Like just destroyed it. And then I started kind of run both, but it wasn't working.
But the first business was only for
just fitness, just like get in shape, build muscle, lose weight, right?
And now you're talking to business owners.
Well, these were trainers to start. Yeah, trainers. And then what happened from there is that blew up so fast that more people were like, well, Tanner, like, you know, I'm not in fitness, but can you help me? And that's what turned into Elite CEOs, which is the main company I have now.
Right.
So as of now, I'm stepping out as the face. I have a very large team, very talented. It took a lot of time. I'm sure you know, just finding great talent is very difficult. But I have that, and then we have these other divisions now that have kind of sprouted off because of what our clients ask for. So they're like, hey, I want setters, I want closers. We're like, cool. We have an elite closer division. Yeah, so we call it elite closers. They want ads. We have an elite ads division. We also have something called Elite 360, which it really is, it's a white labeled version of Go High Level. Okay. But we put all our own stuff in it, et cetera, and the clients love it, and then we love it because we were creating all this recurring revenue. They're going to just pay for something else anyways. Our Go High Level has a great model. They're going to sell for $1 billion or something. And then I'm trying to think, and then I have one portfolio company as of now. Okay. So those are all have their own separate teams, and that actually has probably taken most of my time the last year because instead of starting the company as the face, I've started to build companies as not the face. It takes a little more time. You have to have a little more patience.
More about the brand then.
Yeah, and you know, that's kind of like I'm good friends with Alex Hormozy. That's kind of his model with acquisition.com, and we talk all the time. He's like, yeah, dude, it's definitely slower. You got to have way more patience. And I'm not the most patient person. I don't think he is either. But that's what I'm doing now.
I think Layla helps him to stay
Layla's
more
great.
patient.
Yeah, Layla's great for him. And then so for now, as I step out, then I'm kind of looking to do my next big thing. And when I say my next big thing, I just want something that has a higher ceiling. And that's my outlook is that I did a post yesterday. And it was essentially, you know, people talk about working out. And they're like, well, I'm going to do chest 3 times a week. Okay. Well, studies will show, you know, don't quote me on this, I might be wrong, but last I checked, studies will show if you do a muscle group twice a week versus one, you usually get close to double the growth, right? So like chest twice a week instead of once. Once you go to 3 times, it'll still give you an increase, but it's very incremental, it's small, right? And so that's kind of how I view where my business is now, is it's an 8-figure company. It's done a lot of revenue, but it's kind of at that point where when we do stuff, it gives us a little bit more, but it's not 100 million or $1 billion. It's like, okay, we did 15, now we're gonna do 17, now we do 19. And then, and it's not bad for most people, but that's kind of my viewpoint. And so I just want to pick something that has a bigger ceiling. And that's kind of where I'm at in my journey. So hopefully
in financial terms, it's referred to as the law of diminishing returns.
Correct. 100%.
So when you're
figuring out, that was much better stated.
Well, no. But when you're looking at making those decisions, because again, you've done a lot in a relatively short period of time. How do you personally go about making a decision to say, okay, it's now time for me to step away from being the face? Because that's a huge transition, because most entrepreneurs, they end up building their own personal brand, not a brand as an entity. Yeah. And to step away is disconcerting.
It's kind of like your baby.
Exactly. So what actually goes through your mind specifically?
Well, so it's been a few conversations, and obviously with people more affluent than me, like they're just making more money. They've been in the game longer. So, you know, I brought up Alex earlier. We've become very good friends, and what's been helpful for me is I've always kind of had this, I don't know if the word's excuse, but when someone older than me would talk to me, I just be like, dude, you're just old. Like, you don't know what you're talking about. Like, I just turned 30. You're like 50 something. You don't know. But like Alex specifically has really started to crush it, and when I saw him get out of Gym Launch and like sell it, and now he's doing acquisition, his whole thing was like, yeah, dude, like it was great, et cetera. But it's like, this has a higher ceiling, and it's a better opportunity. And it's more, you know, it's more about the vehicle you're in than how hard you're rowing. And so when I saw that, I was like, you know what? I've been sitting in this business too long. In fact, I think I could have started this process maybe a year and a half earlier, not too much earlier. But I think I kind of got in a point where I wasn't working a lot. The business is making a ton of money. And then I just kind of was like, oh, is this it? And now I'm in a better spot, but that's where I got that from. And then I also have talked to some other individuals who sold for, you know, 2.4 billion, Paul Orfalia. And I talked to a lady in Miami named Kim Perrell. She sold for 100 million and 250 million. And it just kind of continued to reinforce that decision, because she showed me a company called Chief. Okay. I don't know if you've heard of it, but has 15,000 women, been around for 2 years. It's just an exclusive group, so I think it's like you have to be a VP or higher for 15 plus years or something like that. And they did 100 million last year, totally bootstrapped, and it's a $7,500 a year membership. So I'm like, it's cheaper, it's less fulfillment. They've done it faster. It's still growing. They just got a raise at like 1.2 billion, which I don't think they need. They're basically trying to build like clubhouses, which I don't agree with personally, but. Right. I'm sitting there going, this is literally easier than my business. They're making more. They've been around for less time. And I'm like, everything they're doing, it's like I can know how to do it. Right. I know how to do that. I know how to probably fulfill even better. It's just they're more exclusive and they're paying for that exclusivity. So I think that's kind of what got me into this point, is just realizing I think you have to be honest about the ceiling of your business. And it's hard for a lot of business owners, because we always think like, oh, I just need to optimize this and optimize that. And you can, but then it's that law of diminishing return. And there's just other businesses that are built for more growth. And you saw the same thing with Alex Becker. And so it's been helpful for me to just see guys in the internet marketing space kind of
when
pivot.
Alex shifted from info to SaaS, I mean, that was the big aha moment he had.
And like SaaS, and you don't even have to necessarily do SaaS. Like I spoke to another gentleman named Scott Cohen, and he had a SEO agency. Same type of thing. Internet marketer with a ton of skills. He saw Invisalign, and he goes, They're terrible at their funnels. They have a sales team in Costa Rica. I think I could get one in the U.S. that's better, performs more. They do billboards, they do TV, and he goes, I'm just going to beat them at their own game. So he went and started doing Facebook and Instagram and got the USA-based sales team. And he took, I think their cost per acquisition, he said, I don't know this for sure, but I think it was like, $1,200 or $1,300 for a $2,000 product. Wow. He got it down to $400, sold it for $1 billion in less than 2 years, all bootstrapped. And I'm sitting here thinking, I'm like, man, there's just like, it's just a better
sets. Why not?
It's just a better vehicle. And I'm sure he's smart. I'm not taking anything away from them, but I just look at it and go, I'm working so hard to get this incremental, profit, and I don't need the money anyway, so why not swing big? That's how I kind of view it now.
I love that.
Yeah.
And it's the swinging big that's going to get the returns that you desire, because it's not about you and me. We're at an environment where it's not about the money anymore.
Right, no,
it's about the impact. It's about the things you can do with even more. Yeah. And when you're looking at that as a motivator, would you say that that's the thing that's driving you most now? Like, what is it that you are looking for, the big aha? Like, why are you doing what you're doing?
I think it's the personal growth.
Okay.
I went through and I could have a whole nother podcast like depression. That's a whole nother thing. But I went through a phase of where I felt like I was going through really bad depression because I was very miserable, but I didn't have any reason to be. Like, my life's good. And that's kind of how I would view that. And I got to the point where I realized, I said, you know what? Most of what we do, people won't remember. Like, Betty White was a great example. I remember she died, and like a week, like, she's not talked about it anymore. And so I just got to a point where I had all this money and I kind of wasn't broke, which was the goal of the business. And then when I got there, I said, man, like, this isn't really what I thought it would be. Like, I thought I would feel different. You feel pretty much the same.
Yes.
And so then I go, okay, so what's the point of all this? And I talked to a couple people, and I have my own opinions on it, but I think what really helped me was the thought that, well, why does it have to matter? Or why does there have to be a reason for, like, why you do what you do? Maybe you just enjoy it. And so I think I got to the point where I said, hey, I really do enjoy business. I feel the happiest with the growth, like the actual building of the company. When I actually hit the result, so I had a goal to hit $1 million a month, and I hit it. And I remember I just felt like over the moon. And then, like, the very next day I was like, okay, what's next?
What's next?
And so it's really the growth. And so for me, I think what I would go through to have to build $1 billion company, whether I succeed or not, and that's actually the best place to be, it's the growth that will happen versus the actual result, because ultimately people really don't care. I'll tell people some numbers sometimes, just conversations, like, oh yeah, that's cool. And then, like, they go to the next question. I'm like, wait, dude, did you hear the number I just said? But it's just human nature. Like, everyone has their own thing. Everyone has their own lives. And so for me, it's the growth. And then I also really do enjoy, like, seeing my team win. Like, two of my brothers work with me, and they both had no degree. They were going to have to go to college for 4 years, take out a bunch of debt. My parents couldn't pay for it. And now they're making, $250,000 plus a year running as execs for my companies, making way more than I ever did. They're way wealthier than I was at their age. And so I think it's those types of things that really make it worth it. Ultimately, buying stuff, I went that route. I bought super expensive Lamborghini that I wish I'd held on to. I bought it for $550, it sells for $1 million now. Yeah. And I got a really expensive penthouse, and it's fun, but for me, I realized, man, these things, like, get old after 6 months. It's just stuff. And so now that I'm, like, really focused more on the personal growth and not so much the result, I'm just way happier, and I feel like I do a lot better work versus trying to, like, prove something to people or thinking that hitting that goal is going to make me feel different, because it didn't.
Well, I think one of the benefits of being where you are now is that you can look back on the experiences you've had and actually judge the value of those experiences compared to what you're now getting exposed to through the mentors that you're acquiring and the rooms that you're gaining access to. Because the reality is you have hit certain milestones of success that give you the ability to be in rooms that many can't get into right now.
Right.
But let's talk about what actually got you to there. So let's rewind a bit. You were in university. You were playing football at the time. How did you make the transition specifically out of university into your very first business?
Yeah, so that is a whole story. So no one was on board with it. My entire family was very against it. If you meet my brothers, you would know at the time they made very sarcastic comments like, yeah, dude, like, how's the business going? They know it's going terrible. And they would say kind of smart jokes like that. My girlfriend at the time, that was part of the reason she broke up with me. Her mom was not with it. So it was tough.
Because you were dropping out.
Yeah, and so they think my life's over. Like, and I kind of did. I'm like, what am I doing? Because no one in my family has ever been an entrepreneur. No one. Like, grandparents, great-grandparents, no one I know has ever been an entrepreneur. So I'm the first one. And it was my mentor. He's actually a friend of my family's. Okay. And he just said, we went to lunch one day, football was over. I had about 2 months, where I was like really enjoying it. I was like, man, this feels so nice not to do football for 10 years. Right. But then, nature takes over and I'm bored. I'm like, man, this sucks. Like, if this is all my life's going to be, I better just figure something else out. So we had lunch. He said, you should start a business. I'm like, I don't know what to do. I didn't even, I go in a Subway. I had no idea, how do they get customers? Like, where do they make the money? Like, where does this stuff come from? And he just said, look, come to my office, drop out of school. I was just about to go in. I just got accepted into Texas A&M Petroleum Engineering program, which is insanely hard to get into. Insanely hard to get into. And I remember the professor was like, yeah, you have a 3.9. We barely let you in. I'm like, okay, thank you. Yeah. He's basically like, you're kind of stupid for this group. But he convinced me to drop out. And I remember I was on the phone. I called them. And you have to basically tell them you're not enrolling. And I looked at them, and they're on the phone. They're like, so just making sure you confirm you're not coming. And I say, 1 second. I look at him. I'm like, dude, are you sure? He's like, do it, dude. Just do it. And I dropped out. And I spent the next year and a half in his office learning about funnels and emails and just all these things that I didn't understand. I built a whole product from scratch. Uh-huh. Now, the product completely flopped. Because it was low ticket, and I think that was the wrong model for me because I didn't have a lot of money. I couldn't run ads very effectively, obviously. So I'm selling a $47 product, but that doesn't help me. Like even if I make a couple sales, I couldn't pay any bills. So I did that, and I'm about 23 and a half or so now, and I'm like, I got to get out of here because I'm still in my parents' hometown. My ex-girlfriend literally lives across the street, so that was terrible. And so I go up to Utah. I start doing door-to-door sales. I have some family up there. I'm being a server at Olive Garden. And then, again, I start doing it. I'm like, if I make this money, my business will work. It's just the money, which is a lie, but that's what I thought. Mm-hmm. And I finally get to the end of door-to-door sales. I'm getting close. I'm like, man, I just turned 25. If I don't figure it out this year, I have to go back to school. Because it starts to get embarrassing because people see you, and it's just, you're putting all this time and work in, you're not getting anything out of it. And I'm like, I might as well just watch Netflix. Right. So I see an ad on Facebook, probably similar to what people have seen to me, and it was, how to start your online fitness business. I was like, I'll do it. So I get on the phone, high pressure into a sale. I have no idea what they're doing. Like, if you don't buy today, you can't come back. I'm like, okay, I'll do it today. I'll get a credit card. I had to go apply for a credit card, and I paid, and I got in, and long story short, all they said was, you need to raise your price. And I was like, what do you mean? I sell it for $50. That's good, right? Like, dude, sell for $1,500. It's like, there's no way this is going to work. And the cool thing, and I still to this day, it's the 4-minute mile. I keep getting reminded over and over again. I'll put kind of limitations on myself, and then people will remind me. It's like, no, dude, that's not true. So I was like, okay. I started messaging people on my social, and I made $10,000 in the first week. And I was like, oh, shit.
That flipped the switch for you.
I figured out, I called my boss, I quit. I said, hey, I'm done with this. I'm going back. I called my parents and say, hey, look, let me come live at home. I'm going to work 24/7. Let me pay you $1,000 of rent so I can put all my money back in the business. And for the next year, I put my head down. I would go weeks sometimes without seeing my parents. Wow. And I remember people were like, man.
That's all in.
Oh, yeah. And they were like, is their son okay? Because they'd see me at home. And it was funny because my parents were like, yeah, they wouldn't say this, but they're thinking, yeah, he makes more than us. He's doing great. But I was living in this little 300 square foot room. So that's kind of how it all started.
Wow. Well, no, you had mentioned something in passing. Yeah. The whole door-to-door sales thing. Oh, yeah. Come on. Brutal. I actually had to start in my teenage years with that. Yeah. And it was truly transformative for me. Yeah. Tell me about that experience for you.
Oh, man. So that was the best and worst experience of my life. Okay. I had no idea that people lived in these kinds of houses. It was actually humbling.
What were you selling?
So we're selling security.
And
so we would go to very, poor, crime-ridden areas.
Places that needed security.
Yeah, and exactly. And I got dropped off the first day. And what they do is, you're going out there and you're like, oh, it'll be great, et cetera. And they drive you out, get out of the car, and they're like, see you in 8 hours. And they drive off. And you're out there by yourself. And so at first, it was really hard because I don't know. When you talk about stuff, but then actually doing it is obviously way different.
Oh, yes.
So when I went up to the door and you knock and you see them see you and they're kind of like this and then they start walking over, your heart is like boom, boom, boom. And they open what do you want? And just everything you thought that was in your head is completely gone. And so I spent about 2 months doing that, which was the hardest because you're having no success. Like I'm just getting rejected. They'd ask me a question, and in person, you pause too long, they know you don't know what you're talking about. So they're like, well, why should I get this system over this? And I'm like, like,
where's my notes?
Yeah, they're like, dude, I gotta go.
Yeah.
So that was the hard part, but I stuck with it. And I did it for about 8 months. And by the time I got to the third-ish month, I really started clicking. And it was super hard. I mean, it didn't change. I had a situation where a guy pulled a gun on me. I had a situation where a guy pulled a knife on me. And it would be for stupid reasons. Like, I was like, oh, your neighbor Bill down the street just got one. And he's like, why is Bill telling you my effing name? I'm like, dude, I'll leave. But crazy stories. But I think it really taught me that was the hardest thing, even harder than football, because mentally you're knocking on 100 doors a day. You're lucky if you get one person to say yes. And you're in the hot sun. It's 100+ degree heat. It's the summer. I was in Alabama. Oh, so, I mean, you're just sweating through everything. And sometimes you're just trying to get in the house so you can get some AC. But there's a difference, I think, between there'd be reps who would kind of sit down all day. And then there would be the reps like me and my brother who would actually just work the whole time. I go, man, I'm already out here. Like, I got to do it because otherwise I'm just wasting my own time. And so when I finally switched to online business sales, I was like, man, like, how do people complain about this? This is a joke. I went from $500 to 3,000 plus, and I got more yeses, and it was less resistance. And I'm like, these people actually want what I'm selling. Like door to door, the benefit is if you can sell something that that someone doesn't want or they're not expecting. When you get a good lead, I look at high ticket sales and I'm like, you guys are so spoiled. You guys have no idea how hard it is to sell. So it was one of the hardest experiences of my life. I almost quit because we had one day where I had 3 deals, and then you have a technician go and put the deal in. Okay. And he botched 2 of the deals. So the clients are calling me like, I don't want it anymore. Yeah, and I freaked out. I mean, I let it.
You're like, wait a minute, I just invested all this time, energy trying to get the yes.
I lit his ass up. I was so upset, and I remember our sales leaders kind of like, Tanner, like, relax. No, dude, I'm not fucking killing myself and this and that, and this guy just ruined all my deals. But luckily, my brother was there, my younger brother, who's actually stepping in as CEO, and he was like, dude, like, you got to stay, like, just finish. But it all worked out how it was supposed to, because when it finally ended and we had like a little break, I was going to go into full-time sales, and that little break is when I bought that program. And I was just 16 hours a day on that. And then I started making money the first week. I was like, dude, I just made more money in a week than I've made in the last 3 months. Wow. And that's where it kind of all pivoted. So. And
then you transitioned specifically into training online.
Yeah. And just so people have context, the reason I did that is my mentor just said, well, do something you're good at.
Right. You were already good at fitness.
He's like, you've done fitness modeling. You've been a collegiate athlete, like, this stuff front and backwards. And I had the look, and obviously when you're selling fitness, you need to be in good shape. And I was still training like crazy. I was, I don't train this hard anymore, but I was still squatting, 500 pounds and benching close to 400. And so it worked. And I built up a little bit of a following with my modeling at the time. Okay. Probably not the following that I wanted, but I did build up a following. And so when I started hitting people up, that was the first time I'd ever sold anything. So for the first, year, I was just cleaning up.
Easy.
And it was easy sales because these people had already been following me.
Right. You'd built up the rapport already. You had at least an online relationship.
Yeah. And then when I did door-to-door sales, it was just easy to do these conversations because it was all question-based, and I would just ask them the question that would get me the answer I wanted.
Right.
And, a lot of people, they don't understand that's a skill. So they'll be reaching out to individuals and talking like, yeah, this doesn't work. I'm like, you're just not good at it. It's just like talking to girls. Like, just because every guy, says they're good at talking to girls, but we all know we're not.
Right.
And it's the same thing. And so I'd put in the time and effort. I didn't realize that at the time, but all that time I wasted, right, those 2 years, I realized, I was like, that was probably the thing that got me to the level I'm at, because it was the hardest thing I'd ever done and learned, and all that sales ability transferred into my business.
When you're doing door-to-door sales, the objections there are infinite. There's so many different things.
So,
but online, it's so much easier.
Online, you got price, spouse, stall. Right?
Exactly.
That's it. I tell my sales guys, like, look, it's going to be those 3, and then if they still say no, it's belief, and then you just got to fight their belief. Door to door, what did I get? It's like, I wasn't expecting you. My wife's not here. My dog just died. I have a dog. I have a gun. I just got out of a contract. It's like, come back later. Like, there's just anything.
Everything.
And so it was hard at first because I'm like, man, there's so many objections. You have a whole book and you had to get to where you were just on the fly. So, guys would start saying, I have a gun. I'm like, dude, this is perfect. This is going to tell you where to point it. No worries. And I just keep going. Or if I didn't know what to say, I would usually say, that's why I'm here. Right. And even if it didn't make sense, they're like, blah, blah, blah. Like, well, that's why I'm here. And then I would just keep going. But yeah, that's why when I went into online, I remember closing a deal. I was like in my boxers or something. I'm like, man, like I'm in the house, AC, in my boxers, closing deals at $3,000 all up front. I keep all of it. And I was doing door-to-door sales, and the commission was like $500 an alarm. So when it was all said and done, I didn't make nearly as much as I thought. But that experience, I would tell anyone who is struggling with sales or really wants to crush at business, if you do door-to-door, I think the chances of being successful, I don't know what the stats would be, but I can almost guarantee if they just took door-to-door sales guys who start businesses and people who don't, I'd also be curious to look at athletes maybe, because that kind of perseverance really helped me. But I'm telling you, door-to-door sales, I don't think I would be where I'm at if I didn't do it. Wow. It was that hard. So
yeah, I look at a lot of character traits that I can see in those entrepreneurs that have hit milestones of success: perseverance, discipline, commitment to succeed, regardless of what else is going on in your life. And it seems like you embodied most of those, if not all of them, at a relatively young age.
Yeah, the perseverance was by far and away. Because even when I started building my business, I can tell you how many times, like 5 times I called my mentor during the 2 years, and I said, dude, I'm going to quit. Like, and like hearing someone say I was doing 16-hour days or 18-hour days, it's like, oh, yeah, whatever, dude.
Right.
But when you're actually doing that and you're sacrificing your entire life, it is the hardest thing ever when people are looking at you and judging you and saying stuff. Like, I'd be a server at Olive Garden, like, oh, cool, what do you do? And I'm like trying to talk. I'm like, yeah, like I have a business and this and that. They're looking at me like, dude, you work here. Like, obviously you're not making any money. And just like that constant reminder of like you're failing so hard. But it was worth it. And I credit my dad a lot. My dad's very religious, and like a lot of times I feel like he bases like how he did as a parent on like how religious his kids are.
Okay.
But I told my dad, I said, him not giving us stuff and making us work as a kid, we would actually clean the school he worked in for more money. Or he would make us go power wash our rich friends' yards or driveway, because he's like, Tanner, like, we need money. And he just would always, I just remember my dad would just never make an excuse. Like, if we need more money, he would just do all these side jobs. And as a kid, I really hated him for it, because all my friends were like, bro, like, why does your dad make you do that stuff? Or like, why does your dad make you drive a minivan to school? Like, I had a 8-9 passenger minivan. But as an adult, all those individuals, they're so much worse off because their parents, like, it's not the words, it's their actions tell them, like, we'll bail you out. We'll always be here to help you. My dad's like, you're on your own, man. He's like, I already did help you. He's like, I friggin', me and your mom had you. You have a house and you have food till 18, then you're on your own. Yeah. And so I really credit my dad and my mom, because looking back, if they hadn't done that, I don't think I would have the drive, because I would have had a way out. Right. And when I didn't have a way out, I realized either I figure this stuff out or I'm going to have a terrible life. That's how I viewed it. And I got to that point, especially when I turned 25, I said, I'll either figure this out or I'll be homeless. That's how dedicated I was. I literally would have been homeless because I didn't care, because I knew the only way out was forward.
Wow. I know that a lot of business owners struggle with this concept of failure because they only see it one-dimensionally.
Yeah.
The way I view failure is that there is no such thing unless you quit.
Yeah.
And the fact that you don't quit, you can pivot. Pivoting is perfectly fine. Yeah. You just never quit. How many times do you think you've come up and faced that quitting moment and still made a decision to move forward?
Shoot, 1,000,000 times. I mean, I dealt with this in football too, because I got, it was the same thing. When do I quit football? Like, I went to BYU, didn't really like it. I tore my shoulder, had to take a whole year off, transferred, went to the first practice, got hurt again. Then I was like, should I keep playing? Should I quit? I did that multiple times in football. Then when I got to, I started my business, I said about 5 or 6 times, called my mentor, almost backed out. I think the thing for me, it may sound bad, but I think it was just the fact of, like, I didn't want to quit, because then, like, I felt like the rest of my life when I'd come up against hard situations, I'd do the same thing. And I think, I don't know what the exact quote is or the saying, but I think they say that the most successful people on earth, right, they have this massive insecurity of not being good enough, which was me. especially after football, because athletes, people see, ESPN and stuff, they don't realize that 99% of the athletes, after football or basketball is over, their lives are very poor. They have very poor lives most of the times because they don't go to the league, they didn't take care of their business off the field, and they don't really have the skills or attributes to be super successful. Some of the most best players I play with have some of the worst work ethics. Like they were just so much better than everyone. It was just so much better than everyone. So I think for whatever reason, it was that insecurity of not being good enough, but the belief that I knew I could do it. And that's the difference, I think, because I remember I saw Billie Jean, like at the beginning of my career. Okay. And I remember the ad. He was standing in San Diego in his mansion or something, and he was doing this ad about why do doctors get paid more than janitors or something. Right. And people will look at him, or people will comment and say, man, he's a scam, he's this, he's that, whatever. And I just remember going, man, like, that guy's not smarter than me, right? Like, what does he know that I don't know? And I've just always had that mindset. I was never jealous. I never got mad at people. I just always felt like I've done all these hard things in my life. Like, this is just another thing to figure out. And I'm glad I did it because, again, I didn't have another option. I just knew that I wasn't happy where I was at, and I was not excited about being poor. I knew my parents couldn't help me. And so that was it. My dad's like, Tanner, look, you either figure this out or you go back to school and get a job. And I just knew that the type of money I wanted to make, I couldn't make it in school. And so it kind of, when I got to those points where my, mentally I was like very weak and I was ready to quit, I just remember thinking either, dude, look, you have to keep going forward, and then what would other people say? And I think long term that's a negative outlook to have, but it can be very powerful in the beginning where you want to prove other people wrong. Oh, definitely. It's like that anger and that pride and that ego actually in the beginning is very powerful to keep pushing you forward.
I've seen that when you're not yet achieving the particular goals that you have in life, it's usually not the things that you know that's holding you back. It's the things you don't know. So how important has it been learning lessons more on the financial and business acumen side of the spectrum? Because you learn lessons of sales and sales techniques through just the things you've been through, but what about the financial aspects of it? Because to be where you are, you have to have a good understanding of numbers.
Yeah, I think for me, I was, again, it probably goes back a little bit to my parents seeing them budget. So when I started my business, I was very lean. And I basically would wait until the last second to hire. That changes a little bit as you step out. It's more of the opposite where you're like, look, I'll spend a little more to get all my time back and make people happy versus, cut every last, inch for profit. But I was an engineer. I did math. I mean, in fact, my math had so few numbers, you wouldn't even think it's math. It was just letters. It was just letters and it was weird. It was like, it shouldn't even have been a math. And I was like 4 maths above Cal 3. Wow. It was just that high. And so I think I was just really good with numbers. Okay. And, especially with like ads and those things started working, it was really easy. I was like, hey, I put in this much, I get this much out. Here's how much I pay my sales team, et cetera. I think a lot of people, the issue they run into is not necessarily financial. I think they're bad leaders. And most people who get past 0, the next level is 100K is typically where I see, and then they can't get past that because they're not good at leading. Like they think hiring, and I had to learn this too, they think hiring is like, okay, I showed you this for 2 hours, now do it and never mess up. And I didn't realize when you hire, especially in the beginning of a business where you don't have as high margin, you're paying someone and you're doing their job for probably 2 to 3 months. And so for me, I was like, wow, this really sucks. Like I have to pay you and you're terrible and I'm better than you and I have to keep watching you, but that's the price you have to pay to kind of get to the next level. So I think it was just part of me being an engineer, but then the other part is more, I had to learn leadership. And because the financial side, I think I actually can get pretty, black and white once you look at it. But most people, I just think they're not good leaders. So then they're constantly having to rehire or pay an agency or overpay for stuff because they don't know how to actually hire and like train and build good talent. Yeah.
With all this as a backdrop, like where are you heading? Like what's the next phase then for you?
That's a great question. So I don't necessarally know.
Okay. That's exciting though.
Yeah,
it's
it
exciting.
Is. So
scary.
So by January 1st, which is like, a month or so from the time we're shooting this, I should be fully transitioned out. And so at that time, I'll just simply be advising. I might still be in like some ads or some small things. Cause obviously like we don't want to just turn everything off that's working and then just go this way. But at that time, I'm going to probably take, I'd say 2 to 3 months sabbatical. That's actually what most people have advised me to do. They said, look, you've been in the business so long, you've been so busy, you're working all these hours, and that's fine, you like it, but you need the idea now. Mm-hmm. And from what I've seen, it's more about the idea at this point in my career than it is about the work. So they said, give yourself 2 to 3 months, read or do whatever you want. Don't think about the business, and the idea will come. And I've heard that over and over and over again. The other thing I have in my back pocket is I have a lot of smart friends, and so they're like, hey, dude, when you come up with your ideas, send them over. We'll kind of look at it. So that's kind of my plan right now, and I'm trying not to force it because, being creative and then, like, working a lot, they're kind of two different, like, states.
Yes.
I feel like being creative is the total opposite of, like, just grinding.
Usually is, yes.
But yeah, that's my goal. And I've had a lot of good conversations. I just want it to be big enough. And I don't care if I fail, really. I just want it to be big enough that it'll get there. Where it's like, okay, if I want to hit $1 billion, is this idea big enough to get to $1 billion? And as long as it is, I think that's good. I think some of the companies I have now, realistically, they can't get there. They're just not built to get that big. And so that's going to be my number one focus. And then, obviously, as long as I like it, from there, it's just the growth. And I've gotten a lot better at not being tied to the result and just being tied to the growth, because that ultimately is where the fulfillment comes from. And then the irony is that you're going to get the result. It's not going to feel any different. And then most people don't really care anyways. And so for me, that's gotten easier over time to just focus on, like, the growth part and not the result.
I love it. Yeah. Like everything, all these nuggets of wisdom you're sharing are things that you've learned because you've been through it.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of business owners who have not been through it yet, or who are just now in it. Yeah. And they're concerned because it's not fun to be banging your head against the wall, but know that there is another side to that wall. And you can either go through it, you can go up, over it, you can go around it, but you have to continue that momentum forward. One of the things I like to do with the guests that I bring on the show is to go down a mental exercise with me. And if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to take you on that.
Yeah, let's do it.
So what I like to do is I like to ask you to imagine for a moment that you have this ability to go back in time, to visit a younger version of Tanner, and you can share one nugget of wisdom with that younger version of Tanner. Who do you go back to visit, meaning what age, what circumstances, and what's the nugget of wisdom you share?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's going to be 1 or 2 timestamps. And the way I view this answer is more based on time that I feel like I could have moved a little faster.
Okay.
Instead of, like, quote unquote wasted it, kind of go in the same direction. So I think the first thing is, for me, when I was 18 and I was graduating high school, I had a huge dilemma on if I was going to play college football or not.
Okay.
And my whole dream was playing the NFL, but I never played with a first-round draft pick yet. And so I'd see a lot of players, and I'm like, I'm pretty good. Like, I'm just as good as this guy and this guy, et cetera. And football taught me a lot. And so part of this answer, it's like, I think at the bare minimum, I should have done high school football. I don't know about college. I think if I hadn't done football at all, I wouldn't be where I am today. But I was so focused on the NFL that from 18 to 22, I look and I say, man, if I spent all that time on a business, I'd be way farther ahead. And the reality is, if you don't know that you're going to the NFL, if it's a question mark, you're not going. And what I mean by that is, I played with the guy, his name's Ezekiel Ansah. Came over from Ghana, 6'8", 275, was on the 100-meter track team. And they brought him in for football as like a walk-on. And they're like, hey, let's try you out. And I remember they put him with me to lift because I was a beast at the time. And they just wanted to see what he could do. And I was doing 4 plates on squat, and we are doing like 4 sets of 10. And he says he's never lifted before. The guy looks like a Greek god. And he's like, yeah, I'll try it. And I was like, dude, like, you realize, like, this is 405 pounds. Like, I don't want you to hurt yourself. He's like, no, I'll try it. And he gets down, he starts repping it. And I'm like, dude, this is a joke. Like, I've worked my whole life for this moment, and you're just doing this like it's nothing. And then we would run, and he'd be the first guy down the field. And so that in hindsight, no one could tell me that, but like, I played with multiple first-round draft picks now that are still in the league. Some of them are Pro Bowlers and stuff. And so I think in hindsight, if I had been, it's hard to tell yourself that, especially when that's your goal, but maybe there. And then the second one would have been to hire a coach at 22 or so, to either hire a coach sooner or start door-to-door sales sooner, because I was very arrogant, and I'd had all this success. And even with the NFL, I don't think I was good enough, but what I was able to sit on is I said, well, I got hurt. I kept getting hurt, and that's why I can't go. And so I probably use that a little bit as an excuse as to why. But if I'd started 2 years sooner, again, like I look at the opportunity cost. And the first year we did $1 million, second year we did 10, then 15, and then we've gone up from there. And so I go, well, look, let's just say I did 10, like which was like one of my lowest years. That's another $20 million that we could have already made.
Exactly. If
I hadn't done it. And it's all 20/20, it's all hindsight.
Obviously.
But that's probably the two things, because once I started doing door-to-door sales and I started the business and I started hiring coaches, that's when like things really took off. And a lot of it was just pride. I mean, the pride was like, I'm going to play in the NFL. I think that was a pride thing at 18. And then at 22 is the same thing, where I said, well, I don't have money and I'm not going to pay these guys. Like, they don't know what they're talking about. Like, I've done all these things on my own. So it'd probably be those 2 points. Everything after that, though, I felt like was great, and it went pretty fast, honestly. So it was probably, those were probably the 2 biggest points in my life.
Well, I have a second portion of this exercise. What I'd like you to do now is imagine that a future version of Tanner has come back to visit us in this moment. He's going to sit right next to you, and he's going to share a nugget of wisdom for you in this moment. What does he share?
That's a great question. I think in the next year I'll be able to answer it a little better when I'm in the new business. But I think the biggest thing, and I went through a lot of kind of, I'd say, mentally tough times, where when I hit that, the milestone for me that I always wanted to hit was $1 million a month. Okay. And when I hit that, and I just remember feeling not great. And I was like, man, like I did everything I was supposed to do. Like, I make a ton of money now. I have a great house. I have a badass car. Like, I can basically go on a date with any girl I want, or it felt that way. And I felt worse. Like, I felt terrible. And so for me, I think the advice I would come back to, and I'm sure this is going to get reinforced as I get older, is like focus on the growth and not the result. And I know it sounds so cliche, because if I listen to this now, my younger self would be like, that guy's an idiot. He has no idea what he's talking about. But the more I focus on the growth that comes with the business, and not so much how much profit do we make this month and, you know, what number are we going to hit, I feel way more fulfilled, and the result really just doesn't matter. It not only doesn't matter for me, because I don't need the money anymore. Like, I really don't. Like, I can't even spend what I'm making now.
Exactly.
And so it's easier to say when you're in that spot, because when you're broke, it's really hard to say.
Oh,
that.
Absolutely.
But on the other side, I can tell you is once that's taken care of, you realize, well, I mean, whether I make 100 million or 200 million or $1 billion, it's like you can't spend it unless you're just going to fight over who has the biggest yacht, car, house, like whatever. But the growth is really what gives me a lot of meaning, where I feel best. And it has to be what you enjoy, because people are just going so many directions. And when you die, like in 100 years even, no one's going to really remember you, right? Maybe with YouTube and stuff it'll help, but I just don't feel like anyone really ultimately cares, and not in a negative way. It's just we all have our own lives. We all have our own things we want to do. And so if you can just focus on the journey, like if you wanted to be an artist and you did that your whole life as best as you could and you failed, I genuinely believe when you look back, you will have no regrets and you'll feel like you did your best. With football, when it ended, I looked back and I said, I did all the summer optional workouts. I hired 3 coaches. I had an NFL running back who worked with me, NFL receiver. I had one of the Olympic weightlifting coaches for Team USA. I didn't go out. I didn't drink. I did like everything I thought I could do. I was like, I am just not as good as this guy. This guy is 6'8". He's 275. He runs faster. He jumps higher. I mean, you could put a cape on him and thought he was Superman.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's just like if you can fall in love with the growth and you do something you love and you do it to the best of your ability, where people get regret, in my opinion, is they look back and they go, I could have done better. I didn't really do as good as I could. And I think that's the thing, like, lazy people, they're always looking for how to do it easier, and successful people, they'll do things as hard as they can, and they still wonder if they did good enough. And that's where, like, I feel the most fulfillment is just, like, those long days where I'm pushing and I'm trying to do something I love, and then regardless of the result now, I can kind of step away and go, dude, that was a good day. Like, and I did something I wanted to do. So I think that's why I say. I don't know if that was a little too much.
No, I love all your answers. I especially love that answer because my team will tell you, I always talk about the concept of you have to marry the process, not the outcome.
Yeah, 100%.
Because that's what leads to fulfillment.
And you don't have as much control as you think.
You have almost no control.
You know, it's interesting. I had this conversation with a good friend of mine the other day. He's crushing it. and he said something to the effect of, you see all these athletes, right? You were talking about the NFL, so he's like, look, you see that athlete, and no matter what you do, you'll never be as good as him. And he goes, I bet if you opened up Jeff Bezos' head and Warren Buffett and Bill Gates, all these guys, and you looked at their mind compared to yours, like, you'll never be as smart as them. Like, they're just that much better than you. And that may or may not be true. But the point is like, it just comes down to you being the best you can be, because it just doesn't matter. Like, exactly. Like someone eventually will be like Jeff Bezos, like Elon is right now, or maybe someone will eventually be Elon. You're never going to be number one forever, and only one person can be number one. So I think if you can really fall in love with that, that's what it has to be about, because you'll never be happy. And once I hit 1 million, I go, well, basically, I'm not like beating anyone. I just stepped into a new pond.
Exactly. And
then it starts all over. And so if you're just constantly chasing that result, I just think it's a 100% way to be unhappy, because you're never going to win.
I agree, wholeheartedly. So a younger version of Tanner got some nuggets of wisdom. The current version of Tanner has gotten some nuggets of wisdom. I don't want the audience to feel left out. So what's one thing you would want to make sure you share with the audience that they could take home with them and say, hey, listen, I've invested some time consuming this content. I'm so glad I did, because I got this. What is it that you'd give?
I usually give the same advice, and again, it's funny just looking back now as I'm doing these podcasts. My younger self, I'm like, man, that's such boring, terrible advice. But the two things is what you said something about earlier is, one, to never quit. It sounds cliche, but I genuinely believe as you fail, you figure out another thing not to do, right? And I used to think success was like, every time I failed, I was like, man, if I hadn't failed, I would have gone there faster. But you don't understand. You literally have to fail.
Yes.
And so the faster you fail, the sooner you'll get there. Right?
Wholeheartedly agree.
And so that's number one. And then number two is just be willing to hire help, or to, pay for help, because for me, that was my whole downfall. I was so prideful, and I thought I was such hot shit that I didn't pay for something. And I look back, and it made my life worse. It slowed me down. I probably could have skipped out on doing all the serving. I probably wouldn't have had to do door-to-door sales as long. I probably wouldn't have, not made money in the first 2 years of my business. I made $2,000 in 2 years. I mean, it's embarrassing. It's like, what, $75 a month? If that. And so if you can drop the ego and just be willing to learn, and then going back to the man, I forgot the other point I was just going on. Shoot.
No worries. So when you look at giving nuggets of wisdom like this, and you're talking about the fact
perseverance,
that
that's what it was.
You're gonna push through regardless of what obstacles you face, etc. Getting the outcomes you desire requires you to do that. Yeah. And everyone needs to do an accounting of themselves. So you have to really determine, what is the outcome you truly want?
Yeah.
And are you willing to sacrifice the current version of you in order to become the person?
And that's the thing too. And to end on that, you have to make the choice if you're actually willing to do what it takes. And again, I think a lot of what society says with the IG reels and the YouTube shorts and the Twitter posts, it's a lot of bullshit. Like, everyone says the right thing, but very few people do it. Exactly. And so when you're going through a 16, 18-hour day for 2 years, do you want to win bad enough that you'll keep going? And I look at myself, and I still, to this day, I still feel like, okay, maybe I'm not the smartest person ever, but I feel like I have a lot of natural abilities, and I was an engineer, so I have, let's say I'm smarter than the average person, or I can think through things a little better, and I almost quit. And so I go, you have to understand like what you're going up against, because the hardest thing in the world is to put 100% effort into something and get no outcome. Like, it's so hard.
Yes.
Because you like, girls want to go on dates, I'm like, I can't. Or like, friends want to go out, I'm like, I can't. Or my parents would ask me to do something, like, I don't have any money. Like, I would barely have enough money to pay my bills, and then I'm working 8 extra hours a day, and I'm making no sales. So I think, to your point, it's like, people have to be willing to go through whatever it takes to get there, and very few people are. Like, if they don't see success right away, and that's part of why with coaching, right? Like, in my programs, we're trying to get them results in the first 7 days, because we know human nature, most people will fail. But if you can be that person, you can go longer and harder than anyone else, unless you like genuinely have a mental disability where you cannot process information and make a better decision. You will get there. And and if you're less skilled, I just say, hey, maybe it'll take you longer. Maybe for me it was 2 years. For you, it will take 5. And I'm not saying that's fun, but I promise you, on the other side, it's so worth it. I've never met anyone who's like, man, I hit all my goals and I got to where I wanted, but man, it wasn't worth it. I wish I just played Netflix every day. Yeah. Like, you're not going to say that.
Exactly.
You're going to be excited you did. So
Tanner, I appreciate you sharing so genuine with us today. It's remarkable to sit across from people who have actually done the hard work, because no one likes to talk about it. It's true, though. You've done the hard work. You're getting the outcomes that you desire, and now you're transitioning. You're ready to get even better outcomes for the new version of who Tanner's going to be. Yeah. I'm excited to see what you're looking to do, and I just want to thank you genuinely from the bottom of my heart. If the audience wants to get in touch with you, what would be the best way for them to get access to at least your wisdom, whether that's directly through you or the different enterprises that you own?
Yeah, well, I mean, right now, I'm really trying to do my best to put out better content. So YouTube, I would tell people number one, and rip it apart. You know, if you watch it and you see it and you're like, hey, this is not good, tell me what content to post. I love it. And then besides that, probably just my Instagram. You know, and you just type in my first last name. There's very few guys who have both, and you'll find me. So
wonderful. I'll make sure that's all in the show notes.
I appreciate
Tanner,
it.
thank you so much for being here.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing so honestly and so genuinely. Can't wait to see what comes next for you.
Thanks for having me.
And for you, this has been another episode of Entrepreneur Unleashed. I just want to say you have invested some amazing time with an amazing gentleman here. You want to make sure that you don't miss any content like this going forward. So do me a favor, hit that thumbs up, not just because it helps me, because it helps you as well. Why? Because you're telling the algorithm what type of content you like, and it's going to put that information right at your fingertips. I can't wait to see you on the next episode of Entrepreneur Unleashed. My name is Edward Collins. Until next time, bye for now. Tanner, thank you so much.
Yeah.
It's been amazing.
You did great. I can always tell when people have done it a while because they always ask like good questions that make it easy to answer.